If you've ever wondered what an interpretive flower arrangement is, then join me while we design and create a beautiful flower arrangement for Burns Night. Hello and welcome to today's video. Now this time I've chosen to do something a little bit different from the usual step-by-step tutorial. Now today I'm going to look at an interpretive design, and you might be wondering what exactly is an interpretive design. Well, as a commercial florist, I tend to create designs that have a function or a purpose. So it might be a bouquet for a bride to carry, or a bouquet for a thank you present. It could be a table arrangement, a funeral tribute. You know, there's a whole host of designs that we create that have a function or a purpose. But an interpretive design is pretty much what it says. It's a design that interprets a mood, an atmosphere, or maybe an occasion. Now this can be a really emotive design that really creates drama and atmosphere, and it's quite often something that's used in competition work within flower arranging. And today I've chosen to interpret Burns Night. Now if you're not familiar with Burns Night, it's a celebration held on the 25th of January every year, and Scots and their families all throughout the world celebrate the life and works of their famous poet or bard called Robert Burns. Now obviously as a Welsh girl, I don't know a great deal of history of Robert Burns, but to create an interpretive design you really have to do a little bit of research. So I've gone online and I've looked up anything that's associated with Robert Burns and Scottish moorlands, Scottish countryside, a little bit of Scottish heritage, and I've just collected a bit of flowers, foliages, a little bit of accessories here in front of me, which I think is going to interpret that theme quite well. Now obviously if you're from Scotland, you might be looking at me and thinking, she hasn't done a very good job there, but you know, bear with me. I'm hoping that this will progress into a fabulous design by the end. Now I've picked the obvious. I've gone for some tartan. I've also picked a gorgeous green velvet, which I thought worked really, really well together. I've also gone for some moss and bark and some ivy, which I imagine would grow in the moorlands in Scotland. And I've also gone with some gorgeous heather, which of course I imagine is growing abundantly on the Scottish moorlands. I've also got some thistle, so we've got some blue Eryngium, which is the closest I can get to the national flower of Scotland. And then you will probably see just in front of me here, I have a red rose, and I've chosen the red rose because Robert Burns famously wrote a poem called A Red, Red Rose. So I felt that that was really symbolic of what I was trying to create. And I've got the nearest I can get to a white daisy. And again, that comes from another poem written by Robert Burns. And then I've gone for some colours that I thought were really going to complement the colours in the tartan. So we've gone with some blues and some lavenders. And hopefully at the end I'm going to create a design that's more, that for me comes under the category of flower arranging rather than floristry. It's going to be a design, I'm hoping it's going to be a sort of table escape. So something that would, tablescape, something that would sit in the centre of a table, but would be made in situ rather than made here like you've seen me create designs before, and then as a florist they would be transported and given as gifts or used for a practical activity, maybe a wedding or a dinner party or so on. So this is an interpretive design, and I'm hopefully going to make you Scottish people proud and create a design that would be suitable for the centre of a table, or maybe as an exhibit for a Burns Night supper or a Burns Night get together with some local friends. So bear with us, come back in a minute and we'll get creating a really fabulous design. Now it does seem quite apt that I'm doing a Scottish themed design today because it is absolutely freezing. Now you'll see that I've created a little bit of base work before I start. I'm just going to slightly tip that forward for you to see. Now the piece of wood that I've got there at the bottom is just, it's an old shelf of some description, and it just means that it makes the design much easier for me to transport from one place to the other. And it means that if I do take this to somebody's home and it sits on a table, then I don't have any of the moss or the bark sitting directly on top of the table. So you really do have to be very mindful about where your flower arrangement is going to end up. So what I've done is I've added some bark. So these are just ordinary bark that you would pick up while you're out having a walk. So nothing that you can't forage for yourself. And I've added various pieces to the design, just really to give me some texture and some colour, and what I'm imagining would be on the ground on Scottish moorland, bits of bark and some sections of moss. And I've just left the base showing underneath. Hopefully a lot of that will be covered by the time I've finished, but if not, I have the option then to add some more moss to cover the base. It's quite rustic, it's quite natural, so it doesn't really matter, I don't think, if that is showing at the end. Now there are a couple of options that you can do with the heather. You'll see that this is a potted heather, and I think this is an amazing way of creating floral designs, because I've picked this up quite cheaply from a supermarket. It is something that I would sell here in the studio, but I spotted them yesterday when I was doing my shopping, and it's a really good way of getting foliages and flowers and different types of textured material without having to travel to a florist shop or a specialist supplier. You could, if you wanted to, put it into the design as it was, and that would create some beautiful ground coverage of your design. You would have to put some moss around that plastic container, and I've got two, so I think possibly that's how I'm going to start. I'm going to start by creating a little bit of base work in my design, and what I will do is I'll cover the plastic container at the end with some moss, and I'll see how it progresses along. So what I've achieved so far is an even distribution of the colour, and I've gained some height. So we've got lots of interesting material. And again, if you think of Scottish moorland, or any moorland of that description, it's quite low. The wind would be whistling over the top. Now there wouldn't be any tall materials other than very large trees on the moorland, so I'm going to keep this quite low and quite compact, bringing in all those lovely colours and textures that we looked at right at the very beginning. Now the mechanics for this design are floral foam, but this time I've used the Agra-wool. So this is the 100% natural product, and the instructions tell me that I should use the rib side of the foam upwards. So I didn't mention that in the previous video. I think I used it, if I link it up here. So I'm not quite sure whether you'll pick it up on the camera, but there is a slightly ribbed edge on this side, and that's the way the instructions tell you to use it. And it just happens that the plastic container I've used there fits really comfortably into that shaped piece of bark. Now, if you've got small pieces of bark and you want to use them in the design, then you can use them with wires on the end inserted into the foam, and that again will give you different layers and a different perspective to the design. Now, if you choose not to use the heather in the potted plant form like this, then you can easily cut it down and use it in sections and segments within the design itself. Now, one of the benefits of leaving the heather in the pot like this is because I can obviously use it again. So I could plant that in the garden, or I could make another design with it at a later date, or I can of course cut that down and use it again in another design. So it makes your materials go that little bit further. And it could be a polyanthus or a primrose, it could be pansies as we come into the spring, little narcissi, it can be anything. It doesn't, you know, you're not restricted to just the heather variety. I often use potted plants in designs, and if we're sending it out to customers, then they have the added bonus of being able to plant that in the garden as well, so they get twice the value for their money. Right, okay, so let's get started. Enough of the talking. Now I have some lovely trailing ivy, so that's going to give me the start of my design, and typically it is bending in the opposite direction to the way I want it to go. So just a little bit of the warmth of your hand, and that will help it change shape. And what I'm going to do with this one, because I want it to lie across the design in this sort of manner, I'm going to cut it in two places use it in the floral foam so that that side of the design is starting to take shape. And then I'm going to use the other piece in the foam just on this side here, so that I'm continuing that texture and the colour through to one side, just as if it was creeping along the ground. Okay, and then we'll do the same with another piece of the ivy. We'll get that trailing over on the edge from one side and bend that nice and straight again so that it's not curving up in the air. Now, there's nothing wrong with using it facing up in the air, but what it tends to create, it makes your eye move upwards, and we're trying to keep our eye along the ground. And then I've got this lovely long piece. Again, if you were looking for a crescent design and you wanted something that's got that beautiful shape, that would be ideal. But for me, I want it flatter and more along the ground. And I'm going to try and keep the design very horizontal. And my thoughts are that this would look really nice on a buffet table or on the centre of the guests' table if you're having a large banquet or a large party over the celebrations for Burns Night. Right, okay, and then I've tried to choose some colours that really connected with that tartan that I showed you at the beginning. Now, this one is Skimmia japonica and this one is Kew Green. It's got that really vibrant colouring on the end there in the flower. And I picked this one because I've gone with blues, lime greens and whites. And of course the red of the rose. And I felt this was very much a colour that you would find in a lot of the Scottish tartan. It's probably not something that you would find growing on the moorlands. So with an interpretive design like this, you can't necessarily get the exact materials that you would find on the moorlands, but you could interpret the colours and the textures by using something that's quite similar to it. Okay, so we'll spin that round for you to see. Now I'm trying to bring the green all the way through from one side to the other. I'm not working in any specific quantity, so it's not so much like flower arranging and that Back to Basics series when I encouraged you to use a certain quantity of flowers. Now I'll just bring the camera in a little bit closer for you to see how it's coming along. You can see those two pieces of Agra-wool there, lots of texture from the moss and the bark, and of course the height created with those lovely two heathers. And you can see in this shot more clearly those ridges on the top there of the Agra-wool foam. Now I think at this stage we'll leave the camera angle facing down so you can really appreciate the design as it comes together. Now again, I've picked some of this beautiful grey toned conifer, a lovely textured foliage, and it's going to work really well against the texture of the Skimmia because that's a much flatter leaf. And again, it was something that when I did my research and I looked at different photographs, I thought was, you know, had the same sort of texture as materials you would find growing on the moorland. Now I do apologise to the people that are in Scotland because I have lots of friends in Scotland and lots of fellow flower arrangers. So I'm hoping that I'm doing you justice by creating the Welsh version of Burns Night. So at the moment I'm just working on trying to cover my plastic dish, and again, if we can still see it at the end, I can add some moss in there. I'm trying to consider textures alongside one another. So we've got this very rough texture of the conifer against the flat dark green colour of the Skimmia. And I'm trying to do that all the way around until I don't have any of this lovely textured foliage left. Now, although I'm trying to create that moorland sort of feel, I'm now going to, or in a minute, I'm going to introduce some red roses. And you're probably sitting at home thinking, well, you wouldn't find red roses anywhere on the moorland. Well, that's really what interpretive design is about. It's about creating a theme and a feeling. So no, we wouldn't find red roses on the moorland. but it all connects with my research and all the information that I've gathered about Robert Burns and the stories and the poems that he used to tell. Right, so again, we could do with a little bit more foliage as we go along, but that will all get nicely done towards the end. I've still got quite a lot of floral foam showing, but again, you know, that's okay. And I'm going to go now with using my red roses. Now I happen to have 6. It doesn't matter if you have more or less. These are a really good florist grade, so it's a nice big fat head. But again, if you can't get a florist grade rose, then something from the supermarket is ample. And what I'm now going to do is bring in that lovely red colouring into my flower arrangement. I've removed a few of the petals on the outside because they're a little bit damaged, and that's quite normal with a rose. Sometimes the outer petals, what we call the guard petals, need to be removed. And I'm just trying to create what we would sort of almost call that focal line. So I'm just trying to bring the red from one side to the arrangement from the other. You don't have to do this in interpretive design, but because the red is quite a strong colour, I feel that I need to bring almost a link from one side of the arrangement to the other. But we're not repeating identical placements, so I'm not trying to make the design perfectly symmetrical and balanced on both sides. Okay, so let's just get that last one in, and hopefully there now we have that beautiful red colouring from one side to the other. And I'm still trying to be a bit mindful that if this does go on the centre of a table, people need to be able to see the different colours from one side to the other. Now I've chosen this gorgeous green carnation, wonderful colour, and again I thought the different shades of green are really synonymous of all the shades that you would see out there on the moorlands in Scotland, and I'm going to do a similar type placement with them. I'm going to bring the colour from one side to the other, so we've got the green there on both sides. So again, I'll just bring the camera in a bit closer for you so you can see how all those colours and textures are working together. I think that's really lovely so far. I hope you're enjoying that one. Now don't forget, if you are enjoying the tutorials, and of course hit that bell if you want a notification every time I upload a new video, then hit that bell. It really does help other people find the tutorials, and it helps me grow this YouTube channel. Now I have 6 of the lovely carnations, and I've put 4 in already. And I've done a similar thing to the red roses. I've just made sure that the colour is being brought through from one side to the other. It's a beautiful shade of green, really soft. Now I've got the fabulous linear shaped Veronica. It's a purpley blue. I've already put 3 placements in, and I've got 10 of these all together. So again, I'm just going to use them so that the colour is being brought through from one side to the other. So we've got a real bit of drama now with the purpley blue. Now it's one of my favourite colour combinations, is red and the purpley blue together. Not everybody appreciates the 2 colour combinations, but I think it makes a real striking colour combination, and it's going to be fabulous for a dinner party table arrangement. Now it's probably better if I just tilt that forward for you to see. Hopefully everything's going to stay in place. Doing quite well there, I think. Right, now then, let's go with some thistle. Of course, national flower of Scotland, the lovely blue thistle. And I've picked up a few stems of this, and again I'm going to make sure that it's on both sides. We're not really trying to create any particular shape or style. It's got inspiration from the horizontal arrangement that we've done a couple of times in the Back to Basics series, but it's not as important that we follow those very rigid rules. And an interpretive design like this is more about creating a mood or a feeling, or, you know, representing a theme. Right, so now we've got the white daisy, or the nearest I could get this time of the year to a white daisy. Now the white daisy of course was chosen because it's a flower that's talked about in one of the Bard's poems. And again, I'm not going to try and arrange this too formally. Now I'm at the stage where I have to think about covering my mechanics, so making sure this plastic container is covered, my foam is all covered, and of course the plastic dish that my foam is sitting in. So that would be my next job. But before I do that, I'm going to introduce some of this lovely tartan. Now you might be thinking, she's stressed that she's trying to create the feeling of being in the moorlands, but for me, as part of that celebration for Burns Night, would be somebody wearing some tartan, whether it's a kilt or whether it might be worn as a shawl. And I was thinking that this beautiful, very dark green, quite extravagant velvet would be beautifully worn as a dress. So my inspiration for these two materials are maybe from materials that would be worn for Burns Night rather than maybe the location that you would be in. So I'm going to introduce this. I've done a double bow with the velvet on the back and the tartan at the front. And I'm just going to introduce that somewhere into the arrangement. And I'm sure that there are lots of other materials that have that sort of Scottish tradition. Now I'm sure there are lots of materials that could be included in the design for Burns Night, but I really love the texture and the quality. It brings a real extravagance into the design and makes it feel quite opulent and quite special. So we're just going to speed up the camera for a minute while I fill in the gaps, and then we'll come back and have a look at the design at the end. Now I think I'm pretty much finished with the design for today. Now that's my interpretive design for Burns Night, and I hope you've really enjoyed that one. It's a completely different look at flower arranging, and whether this design is on the centre of a table, it could be on a large sideboard as you come into the entrance room, I'm hoping that that's going to do justice to my Scottish friends. So, happy Burns Night everybody, celebrated on January the 25th, and we look forward to seeing you again very soon. Bye for now.